Friday, 10 p.m. to 12 noon, as I prepare to launch this program officially at the first of the year. Looking forward to it. We're lining up a lot of very interesting guests. And hopefully at this time of night, there might be a little less censorship. We'll see. I'm basing that more on hope than on anything else. My guest this evening is Tony Lyons. He is the president and publisher at Skyhorse. He's an attorney, was publisher at the Lyons Press between 1997 and 2004. He founded Skyhorse in 2006, and he's been involved with every aspect of the book publishing process, starting with a small team of people, some of whom still work at Skyhorse. Tony has steadily built a company from the startup to an increasingly prominent mid-sized publisher. Tony, thank you for joining me this evening.
Thanks for having me on.
You know, I took a look at the Skyhorse roster, and you've got an incredible list, cross-section of books from, seems, all sides of the political spectrum, all sides of the culture. Right now, you have America's #1 top best-selling book, that being by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., The Real Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, Big Pharma, and the Global War on Democracy and Public Health. And yet you're saying that you're having problems with censorship. And I happened to listen to Robert Kennedy today on with Steve Bannon's War Room, which is an excellent program, by the way. And he mentioned that he's not getting, the New York Times bestseller list is not mentioning it. He's only gotten interviews with a few people. I think Tucker Carlson is great, but other than that, he's being ignored. And yet the book is one of the top selling books in the United States right now. What do you make of this?
Well, so yeah, I mean, this is the best-selling book in America. It's #1 on Amazon. It was a #1 Wall Street Journal bestseller, #1 USA Today bestseller, #1 Publishers Weekly bestseller. And yet there's just a total media blackout with, no major newspaper in the country has covered the book, has addressed any of the claims in the book. And bookstores all around the country are boycotting the book because they don't like the general subject matter. And the online platforms are not allowing advertising for it. They send back a note saying that it's misinformation. It is kind of shocking that they could consider a book like this to be misinformation. And it really shows you something of what's going on in this country now. Because, this is a book that has 2,194 citations. It's got blurbs from doctors and lawyers, even a Nobel Prize winning scientist.
Yes. Oh, it's completely vetted. I mean, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the scone of one of America's most prominent political families. He's a trial lawyer. He's mentioned that nothing that he's said in this book has been challenged, certainly not legally. And, and yet there is this kind of amorphous censorship going on. When did this really start to take hold? Because, I think that anyone who's kind of, even people on the far left, but anyone like right of center has experienced this situation. When did it get started?
Well, first of all, let me say that, I really don't see this as a question of being a Democrat or a Republican. It's not or left question. It's really a question of being on the wrong side of history, that this kind of censorship is just, so out of place in the United States. I mean, it's the First Amendment to the Constitution for a reason, and it's because free speech is so important. So, when did this start? I mean, 10 years ago when we published Bobby Kennedy's book, called Thimerosal, which was about, mercury in childhood vaccines, in mandatory childhood vaccines. There were articles written about how terrible the book was that came out before the book was available. So they were obviously prepared beforehand. And a similar thing kind of happened here, is that the playbook seemed to be to ignore the content of the book entirely, but to try to do everything possible to discredit Bobby, to discredit the author of the book, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So basically what that looks like is that the hit pieces started months before publication of the book, and they were in newspapers and magazines. Even AP did a deep dive, what they considered to be a deep dive. And they did it, right at the time of publication of the book, knowing that it would be picked up by various other newspapers. And what they did was they rehashed all this old stuff that was designed to discredit Bobby, but they didn't, get into anything that was actually in the book, any of the actual claims of systemic corruption that are at the heart of what the book is.
Well, I mean, even at a very small scale, I mean, I experienced this when one of my books was published by WND Books 10 years ago. And even as it came out, I had some reviewer in San Francisco wrote an attack piece that it was pretty obvious that he hadn't read the book, and it had nothing to do with the book. It had nothing to do with anything. It just was out of the blue. And so I think that this is something that happens out there in general, but it seems to me that this kind of process of attacking certain points of view really ratcheted up when in 2017, when Donald Trump was elected president, and there was a decision, I think, made on the part of big tech to not let that happen again. I mean, to figure out how to put in algorithm and all the rest. And then, of course, it reached a major move forward when President Trump was literally censored while he was in office, and something that was protested by world leaders around the world, including people who didn't like him, that he was removed from Twitter. And from that point, there was a lot of this going on. Anyone who didn't fit some sort of an establishment view, whether it be left, right, or center, would find that they were being removed for things like, quote, misinformation and stuff like that. So, this has become really at this point systemic in our system, and it really is un-American in terms of the spirit of things. And yet we're told, well, these are private companies, so they can do whatever they want.
Yeah, well, they're private companies, but they get a lot of pressure from politicians with a very specific point of view. But that's where it gets to be, really government censorship, because, senators write letters to Amazon or to Google or to Facebook and then bring them in and question them and pressure them to censor things in a certain way. And what people don't recognize is that if you go down the road of this kind of censorship, so if you censor, say you're a Democrat and you're censoring Trump, so you're censoring President Trump, and doing that feeling like you really hate him and you disagree with the things that he said. But what you don't recognize is that that's going to come back to bite all of us later, whatever our point of view is. Because if you can censor a president, of course you can censor anybody. And if you censor the things that you don't believe in or things that make you angry, then at some point, the things that you really feel are true and important, they're going to get censored too. So the right way, for this kind of thing to work in a democracy is to have dialogue and debate and to let, differing points of view coexist, and to kind of be willing to live with that uncertainty and make it so that the better arguments win. Not the most powerful person who can just censor every point of view that they disagree with. So Dr. Fauci saying something like, I am science, so if you're against me, you're against science. That's the beginning of the end of the democratic process. And, that's a lot of what's covered in The Real Anthony Fauci is the tendency towards the destruction of democracy and of and of sort of like not just freedom of speech here. I mean, this is a kind of corruption that is systemic in the medical profession, where there's just this incredible web of financial entanglements, and that those entanglements become the priority. So making money for partners, for example, becomes the priority. And so these people, whether it's Dr. Fauci or even the CDC or other branches of government that become captured by the corporations that they're supposed to regulate, that whole process, that corruption, really tears apart our democracy and has to be stopped.
Well, it's, the example you're using here, which is an excellent one, and that is Robert F. Kennedy's book, is really the symptom of a type of corruption that has become so pervasive at this point, and so interlocking in terms of big tech and working with government, working with big pharma, working with the top social and political institutions in the United States. And I'm not saying that this is a formal conspiracy where people sit around in a smoke-filled room somewhere, but I'm saying it's kind of an informal establishment understanding. It's kind of like what Whittaker Chambers called a conspiracy of gentlemen. People think alike, they all kind of know how each other thinks, and they kind of know how to act and how to move when something enters into their worldview that might interrupt that. And this book by Kennedy really throws some major, bombs, I guess you might say, in terms of looking at the background of Anthony Fauci and some of the motivations there. And it's just amazing to me that they've been able to simply suppress that. And I guess that I'd like you to maybe bear in a little bit, Tony, here on who is the they that is involved here.
Yeah, so, it really is the large pharmaceutical companies that are connected to Dr. Fauci and others over a long period of time. And, so one of the things that I just wanted to point out was that I've known Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for about 10 years since we published his book on thimerosal. And I've seen that, he's a meticulous researcher. He's an incredible fighter for justice. He's brought literally hundreds of lawsuits against corrupt big corporations, and he's worked really, really hard to try to get governments, government bodies to do their job as far as regulating big corporations. And so I feel that the American people ought to be really grateful to him for the work done for all these decades, but also for this book that he's written. I mean, this was an incredible, this is the book that he worked on 7 days a week, 16 hours a day. Really hours a day over a 9-month period.
And we should note that in spite of the suppression, if you will, this book is selling like crazy. The Real Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, Big Pharma, and the Global War on Democracy and Public Health. And it's doing so without any attention from this sort of amorphous mainstream establishment. And I think that the censorship of this book is particularly odious. It's one thing to censor a sitting president of the United States. That's bad. And it's, but this is one that deals with life and death questions. This is a health matter. This is something where people are dying all over the world, all over the United States, perhaps needlessly. But either way, when you have a situation where there's this disease, this pandemic, there has to be an open debate. You can't just let this thing be stage managed by people who are, setting themselves up as the gods of science. I mean, there are scientists and epidemiologists all around the world who are being censored right now because they have an alternative opinion. Now, that may be right, it may not be right, but the thing is that there's no debate. It's all going through this. I mean, it's very Orwellian. It's like this Fauci guy is standing up there as sort of this empty suit that just mouths all these platitudes, and that's what we all are supposed to genuflect to and say, yes, sir. It's just it's something that, I mean, where's the civil libertarians? Where's the left? Where's all their claims about concern over this?
Yeah. I mean, it really is shocking how that's been working. I mean, but the one really beautiful thing to see here is that the fact that the book is still doing so well, really proves that censorship doesn't work, that ultimately it just doesn't work in this country, because people are not willing to be told what to think, what to read, or what not to read. And if they're told not to read something, or if they see that a big book comes out that's a #1 bestseller, and that they read story after story, of these just awful hit pieces, they see through that, and they recognize what's going on. And then it makes people really want to read the book, and it makes people wonder, why is it that a serious book like this, that's claiming corruption at the highest levels of government, is not leading to congressional investigations, is not getting any response on the merits, where Dr. Fauci responds and says, no, these things aren't true. I didn't actually do these things. So nobody's saying that. And that's right. And that makes people wonder why it is that so many people want them not to read this book.
Well, I mean, it basically breeds distrust on the part of the American people in the media and in our establishment. And then, of course, we are denounced and attacked for having that distrust. All right, my guest is Tony Lyons. He is the president and publisher at Skyhorse Publishing. You've got some incredible, books up here. One of them is Epstein and Maxwell, Inc., How the U.S. Government Made Spying, Sex Trafficking, and Blackmail Big Business. Now, I don't know how they're getting away with it, but right now in the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, with the chief prosecutor being James Comey's daughter, which I think says something interesting, they have been able to, censor and suppress the release of any of the general information that usually is released in such a high-profile trial. And I don't hear any protest on that. I mean, it just creates, in my mind, the possibility that someone is trying to hide something here. What say you?
Well, I mean, it's very similar to what's happening with the big pharmaceutical companies, where the government is saying that the data behind much of their research, doesn't have to be released to the public for 25 years or 50 years. It seems to be a moving target. But, you've really got to wonder, like you said, why is it that on all these different things, the public has to be somehow protected from the truth? Why would they withhold that kind of information in the Epstein case? Why would we not be able to see every bit of research having to do with the things that are being done to combat COVID? Shouldn't we have the opportunity to see what that research is? And if it's dangerous and if it's scary, we should have the right to use that information to make decisions.
And what's happened to our so-called independent media in this country? I mean, are they all basically part of one small conglomerate of people from the top? I mean, we saw the attacks on President Trump, whether you liked him or not. It was the standards of media went way down the drain. I mean, they would run a story with just one anonymous source, and then they'd retract it the next day after the damage was done. And this was done constantly. And of course, during the 2020 election, people are accused of talking about, conspiracies around the election, steal, whatever. The point is, the media did nothing to investigate any of this. Instead, they mocked and they threw ridicule and denunciation on anybody who questioned it. It's almost like it's very Soviet style. And where are independent journalists? Where are people who used to actually do real investigation and not worry about the political fallout, but they would go right in and just get to the truth.
And that's exactly what's happening here. That this, like I've said now, is a very serious and meticulously researched book that claims serious corruption by really powerful people. Why isn't the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, why aren't they looking into these actual claims and either disproving them or giving us some counter argument for what's going on? And why are they all so quick to just, call Robert F. Kennedy Jr. an anti-vaxxer or a conspiracy theorist? These are legitimate, seriously well-researched claims, and they have to be addressed. I mean, this is a democracy. We don't live in a fascist country. Somebody makes these kinds of claims and they need to be addressed.
Well, this kind of begs the question, Tony, why aren't they doing it? What do you think? I mean, do you have an opinion that you'd like to share on that? I mean, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to get a sense of how it works, but I think generally they're scared, they're lazy, they get on board with a kind of a way of doing things that it's sort of come down from the top, that COVID or anything having to do with Dr. Fauci is off limits. And what they basically will print is a press release from the CDC or from, Dr. Fauci or from some other branch of government that's, prepared for them. And they then print it under, somebody's byline who's part of their newspaper or magazine.
I mean, I think that recently Lester Holt kind of let the cat out of the bag a bit when he received an award for journalism. And he said that objective journalism is passé. And, that activist journalism is like the thing of the future. And it seems to me that that's what's going on. Yeah.
So the idea is that they think that the truth comes from Fauci or from the CDC. The job of journalists is to sort of disseminate this truth that they were given to the stupid general public. And that's a very cynical way of viewing the world. At very best, that's a cynical way. But there's another side of it, and that is advertising and pressure that is brought to bear on those companies. And so anytime you see advertisements for specific kinds of products on a TV show or in a newspaper, I think you ought to think about whether that creates any kind of bias or conflict of interest. So, going back to that kind of issue, the author of The Real Anthony Fauci, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he has no conflict of interest here. He's only trying to uncover corruption, and he's trying to help the American public, and he cares about public health. And so the problem is that all the people who he's describing in the book are clearly in it for the money. I mean, they have these incredible entanglements, they have conflicts of interest, they are in it for the money. They don't care about public health. And that's what really comes clear in the book.
Oh, absolutely. And it shows when you see major network television and you see major media, the amount of money that's spent by drug companies is incredible. And I would certainly think that's corrupting. You also have the phenomena of this almost monopolistic, informal control by big tech over internet information. And that means favorable coverage for people like members of Congress. These people crave attention. That's what they do. I mean, they want to get their big face up on television. So they, it's not even necessarily a conscious thing, but they feel reluctant to criticize, big tech over that because they don't want to end up getting put behind the, the algorithm wall like President Trump was. And, obviously he was held up as an example of what can happen if you don't play ball. So, I mean, I don't know if it's simply a matter of money which it is partially, or if it's a matter of laziness, as you say, kind of, sloppiness. People get a press release and they run with that. I mean, I wonder if it's something bigger going on here in terms of literally an attempt to suppress information that might not conform to a bigger global view of the future that is held by people that are very high up.
Yeah, and I would think that is definitely a major part of what's going on here, and that is really well covered in the book, much better, much more so than I could describe now. Right. But if your listeners really want to get into the details of what's going on and what Robert Kennedy's claims are, I mean, this is just a fascinating, in-depth book. It's 200,000 words. It's a big project reading it, but it will change people's views about how the whole world works.
Yes, indeed. So, Tony, you have an incredible shelf of books here at Skyhorse. Have you been running into issues of generally of censorship of your authors as they publish the book? I mean, obviously, an author wants to get some interviews to get the book out.
Yeah, sure. So let me tell you one story that I was sort of fascinated by and saddened by, and that was last year we published 2 books simultaneously. One of them was The Case for Masks, and one of them was The Case Against Masks. And the case against masks was, taken down from Amazon, and it was very hard to do anything to promote that book. And the case for masks was, of course, left up, and it was very easy to publish. So, that's just a pure case where there are powerful groups, powerful people deciding that democracy doesn't work, that dialogue and debate doesn't work, that people aren't smart enough to hear both sides of the story, and that they just need to get the truth. And that's a scary direction for this country.
Yes, and of course, doing a YouTube program, I've noticed that you cannot mention either the I drug or the H drug. I think you know which ones I'm talking about. Because you're going to lose your YouTube channel, even though these are both FDA-approved drugs. They've been used, millions of people have taken them over many decades. For whatever reason, in the United States, it has been decided that this cannot be discussed. It's kind of in the same realm as what you're talking about with the mask. You can't talk about gain-of-function research. All of these subjects are taboo. Is there a particular, view that they're pushing here? Or is it, what's going on with that?
Like I've said, I think that it's about the financial entanglements, where, big pharma, many of those companies are, have been doing these kinds of things for decades, where the important thing for them is making money. It's not about public health. And, one of the allegations in this book is that, Dr. Fauci is not concerned with public health, but he's concerned with the profitability and the protection of these companies that are just out to make more money. So, like I said, this is an incredible book. I highly recommend that people read it and that they ask themselves, why is it that so many people don't want them to read it?
Thank you. Okay, so Tony, do you want to mention a website or any information where people can get more information about your work and about your publishing house?
Sure. So our website is www.skyhorsepublishing.com. And since there's been a lot of boycotting from bookstores, the best place to get the book is on Amazon. That's the quickest way to get it. And there are other places that have it. But like I said, there's been a lot of censorship even at the bookstore level.
Indeed. And, let's keep open minds and not believe everything that we're spoon-fed. Anyways, Tony Lyons, president and publisher at Skyhorse, I want to thank you for joining me this evening. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for